So this episode is going to be called "The Aesthetics of Austerity," 1939 play ball. So I want to discuss this specific issue, and the card I'm going to use here is the Archivon from this set, card number 55. I want to talk about distilled essences and the baseball card really being drilled down into something absolute and fundamental. As you're aware, right, 1939 in the U.S. Let's take a look. Still recovering from the Great Depression and grappling with isolationist sentiment while witnessing the early stages of World War II in Europe. Slowly recovering economically with New Deal programs still in effect. Many Americans favored remaining neutral in growing European conflict. This is the start of World War II, Germany invading Poland. Initial declaration of neutrality, and Roosevelt prepares for potential involvement. So, Manhattan Project is on the way. Gone with the Wind. I really love this issue. And it's just really deeply meaningful to me because it's nothing. There's just nothing about it. And it's something that I think to its benefit in that sense, it hasn't really caught on anywhere. Because you can see the sheer emptiness of this set. When I look at it and when I look at the set, it's like this void, an absence. And as you can see here, I think the Archivon is a good example with the highly blurred background. It takes it out of time and place, similar to the 34 through 36 batter-ups. There's a couple of cards in that set that they totally disappear the background. It's like they're in this Dust Bowl storm or a sandstorm or a absent environment. And that's something that's common to baseball cards. Even going back to the early caramels or the T206s, or even before with the Carl Horner portraits, it's a abstraction from the environment and abstraction from the backdrop. And I think in a lot of ways that's what baseball represents and represented during these critical time periods of American identity formation. It was this something explicit and grounded within a abstract void of an environment that was undefined, unclear, and moving in 15 or 20 different directions at once, whether that was economically, socially, industrially, politically, and globally, right? The early modern periods of American identity formation, the one thing really, when you look at American history that remains stable and constant is baseball. So it's no surprise that out of these voids, whether they're colorless voids, grayscale voids, as in 39 play ball, or colorful voids, as in like E90-1 or the Anonymous set, the early caramels, going into the Goudeys, as well as the U.S. caramel set. These are red, green, blue. You have the purple void of the 1941 play ball, Joe DiMaggio. We're talking about an aesthetics of identity formation, which eventually culminates in the pop art movement of the 50s, with these bright colored backgrounds in the Warhols, as well as the 1954 tops, or the 48, 49 Leaf and Bowman sets for baseball cards. The 39 play ball, though, in particular, it to me is the quintessential baseball card because it's just so void of any sort of attempt to create a theatrical representation or an artistic, creative representation. These cards, when I look at them, and I'm just going to pull a couple more up for myself as I go off of this. They're the moment they're made, it's almost like they're a memory. And I look at the Paul Wainer too is another good example. That's card number 112 in the set. Again, abstracted background. He's the only figure. He's mid swing. These are very documentary, bare bones cards. It's basically what you would see in terms of a newspaper photo. The entire front of them, right? It's just the image of this photograph, and then on the background you have the basic statistics, kind of player cards, so to speak, of the different styles of batting, where they're born, when, and a very, very, very simple player bio. The language is just very clear, very straightforward, non-metaphorical. He has never hit under 300 in the major leagues. Was the leading batsman of the National League in 1935. Vaughn led the National League in runs scored with 122. And then at the bottom, obviously, you have the play ball - America. Gum Inc., Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Printed in the USA. Safe to get them all. This is interesting to me when I think in terms of the economic situation in the United States, compared to the onset of the Great Depression with the Goudeys and the Diamond Stars. It's almost like the Goudey and the Diamond Star sets are a sort of reactionary attempt to create meaning or power or beauty in the midst of this very, very bad social, political, and economic situation, which is the United States' just total collapse of the economy between the First and the Second World Wars. And then when I look at 1939 play ball, there's something so grounded about them. There's nothing flashy. There's no flashy language. There's no flashy poses. There's nothing dynamic. It's almost like they're this faded memory of a dream, so to speak, to use a funny old quote there. And they just exist. It's, to me, one of, if not the most understated baseball card release ever. Of course, you have cards with a similar tone to this in terms of the Goudy wide pens or the what would I think of? Some of the ice cream cards of the late 1920s. Things along those lines. But this is it's very quintessential, and it's well wrapped within the traditional baseball card format and size. Right? These are not redemption cards with a strange size or a strip card with a strange size. You've already reached the point where we understand what the conventional baseball card size is going to be. And we have an understanding of what the front and back of the baseball card represents. Right? You have the bio, the statistics, and the kind of signature of the gum company or the cigarette company or whatever company produces these, right? And so what Play Ball did in 1939, and it's different than the 1940 release, as well as obviously the 41 with color, is that there is no decoration. It's almost like you have a type 1 photo on cardboard with the background that's been edited out, similar to as you would see in a documentary newspaper cycle. And you've been given the distilled, abstracted representation of the figure and just the absolute, utter, essential statistics and signifiers of said player on the back of the card. And what this represents to me is an aesthetics of austerity. It's almost like there's a moment of brutal clarity that happens in American civilization and American culture. And it happens as the sort of horrible drug of the Depression is wearing off. And meanwhile, you have this Second World War beginning to rage in Europe, right? There's this slow fomentation of the war in terms of what's going on in Germany all throughout the 30s. and then the invasion of Poland. And there's this sense, right, the United States is preparing to get involved. It almost seems inevitable, despite these isolationist kind of attempts, right? And there's almost this moment of brutal clarity that is represented to me in the artlessness of the 1939 play ball set. And what I mean by artlessness is just a total lack of the attempt to manufacture anything, beauty, meaning, power, something to distinguish these cards, which is so contradictory, right, to the whole project of the baseball card as a marketing device. Right? These are the gumming cards for play ball. I believe the owner of play ball was actually, I think his name is Joseph Bowman, and then he goes on to found the Bowman card set. And you can see these design aesthetics transfer over to the early Bowman cards, particularly 1948 Bowman, which I think is also an underrated release. But I do think the 39 is better because of the poses. The poses capture more of the sport of baseball, as opposed to a lot of the close-ups and portraiture that happens in 48. 48 is just a little closer. If that makes sense. The lens and the frame of the cards are more portraits than they are environmental kind of action shots that you would more traditionally see in a newspaper. So I'm thinking if I want to pull up, because it's interesting to see that design legacy carry forward into the 48 Bowman set. But it's much more modern, and even the photography is clearer in that set. So you have almost a 10-year layover between the resumption of this play ball design narrative, and then obviously it changes and becomes color images in 49 and 50, 51, 52, 53 with the color photography. Again, abstracted background, wide angle, zoomed out representation of the figure in an environment that can't really be understood. There's a couple of them, I think, in 39 that are less blurred out. But a lot of them, like the Ted Williams card, for instance, is against a void backdrop. There's this blackness, and then there's a slight I don't know if it's like a stairwell or a barrier wall. And I really enjoy this. Some of them are less blurred out. Like I'm looking at the Bob Klinger card now, card number 90 from the set. I'm just scrolling through some of these. I really enjoy the unadorned nature of this because it's almost like the one moment that America isn't on some sort of dream drug, a dream drug of idealism or the attempt to paint over reality with a beautiful narrative or a mythic narrative. I mean, this is wartime baseball, but it's also baseball at one of the lowest and most difficult points in American history. But it's a couple of years into this process. I mean, 32 is the crash, and then you have these years where it's difficult to grapple with the truth of the situation. You get towards 38, 39, and then you're getting into World War II, and it's a moment to me of critical sobriety. And this is something that you have some of the issues like Morehouse baking in the 19 teens that are kind of similar to this, but we're still that's still a period of what the baseball card is undefined. On the backs of those cards, they're usually either blank backs or they're advertising backs. This is a fully formed. This is a modern baseball card. This is what you would see on a current baseball card today. You'd have the player portrait or the player pose on the front. Then on the back, you'd have essential statistics as well as a player biography and some of the data on the company that produced it. This is the modern baseball card. And for me, this is really the first time where you see that synthesis. You have the Goudy wide pens and the premiums of the 1930s that have a similar design ethos, but they're still not this fully formed modern baseball card with the cardboard dimensions, the handheld aspect, as well as obviously the fully detailed and laid out back. This is a unity of the design conventions in its most distilled and minimalist form. And in that, it mirrors, I think, the sentiment at the time at a cultural level in one of the clearest ways. It could almost these cards could almost do with even like, I almost want to say more blurring and more abstraction, but it would, again, that would bring these cards into art more, if you see what I'm saying, because it would, you would begin to be messing with the foreground background dynamics to remove the character from the natural environment. That's why this Archivon is such an interesting one to me, because it's almost like a fog. You can still see, it looks like there's people in the background and he's standing on this baseball field. And it looks like you're kind of looking at it through glass, like through layers. There's like layers of glass that's behind him. You're seeing this like refracted scene that's occurring. It's a really beautiful, just fundamental, basic shot. That's the thing about these. There's not too much to say about them, because they are so distilled and they are so drawn down to the fundamental and the essential. And that's what makes them so beautiful. But it's also, I think, what makes them so forgotten as a set. There's no there's no kind of humor and cartoon aspect that you would see in the 38 Goudy heads ups. There's no beauty or attempt to make art as you'd see in the Diamond Stars or the Goudy 33 and 34 Goudeys. It's not commercial, and yet it's supposed to be. And that's the beauty of these aesthetics of austerity, because they allow for the assertion of something true, because there's no real ability to lie. It's almost like the lie either is just not possible from a manufacturing standpoint, and or it's not something that would be received. The country is not in a mode or in a moment to receive a sort of colorful, poppy, bubblegum set of cards that betray an untruth about the nation at the time. So you also see this with the 1941 double play. That's another great set. But even when you get into the 1940 and 41 play balls, you see this attempt to adorn. And this is when it becomes clear the United States is going to enter the war. It almost seems to be a matter of time. And you can see again this myth instinct and myth impulse rising. And I almost want to say, I was reading this quote earlier. It was what the attempt to mythologize is like the entry into a false world, or it's like the attempt to deal with real serious psychological or collective cultural trauma in a way that is digestible. It's like a dissociative method. So people that enter the mythic realm usually enter it through a period of great trauma and disturbance, even in a mystical sense, in terms of if you want to talk about the path of the mystic or the path of the shaman, right? They enter into it through a form of psychological or even physical wounding, because it reveals to them the contrast between everyday life and this realm of disturbance. And so that's why it's interesting to see this 1939 play ball set appear, because if you look at like the graph of like energetic fluctuations, so to speak, in American history between periods of profound traumatic impact, whether that's the Depression or World War I or World War II, you're hitting this very weird downward sloping in terms of the digestion of the real impacts of the Depression, the attempt to create New Deal initiatives to spark an economic boom in the country, and then this rapidly rising, almost like immediately after the production of this set, uh, resumption into World War time, right? Again, this sentiment of this impending chaos or rupture. So you have this very short period of time between 1932 and 1939 into 42, 41, 42, where you have this downward sloping graph into the digestion of this profound rupture that happens culturally and economically with the Great Depression, and that the country is still trying to digest this and recover from this through the New Deal initiatives. And then World War II starts, right? And then the U.S. ends up having to get involved. So when you see that kind of energetic graph, it's really interesting to look at those moments, that moment of the dive, and then there's another ascent into a critical moment of rupture. You really look at that moment of 1939 play ball. I think it's a really profound documentary news, like it's a newspaper in cardboard. And I really appreciate that and respect that about this set. And it's a newspaper in cardboard in a way that nothing else touches, right? I talked about 41 double play. That's a short bio, but it's not really a baseball card in the sense that it's fully formed with the front and back. Details, description, biography, call sign for the set, and the fully formed, somewhat conventionally sized baseball card. It's like a handheld newspaper card board, and I think there's a clarity with that. It's like a form of documentary social realism. And I talked a little bit before about WPA photography. I think this is a really great example of that here. Whereas in other sets, you have subtle attempts to enhance or create theater, create spectacle. Even 41 play ball, I think it's that you have 1940 play ball, and it's much more decorative, but on the front in particular, in terms of the decorative framing as well as the player name on the plaque at the bottom. And then in 41, you have this colorization and cartoonization again. And it's interesting to see this happen, especially when you look at 32. 32 was there's only U.S. caramel, but then you look at 33 Goudey and 34. It's this manufacturing of the cartoon, mythic, abstracted, color, lush environment, and you can see that as it fluctuates throughout the 30s and into the 40s, based on these critical moments of traumatic rupture that are happening in United States history, right? It's like a civilizational impact, subconscious impact that's influencing the way that these cards are produced and the way that they're attempting to perform, whether that's art or theater or this sense of America's pastime being this abstracted, cartoonish, almost other world, right? It's like a form of cultural escapism that occurs there. And I think it's something that's very clear when you look at these sets through the 30s and how they dip and how they ascend, in terms of the construct of the card, how it looks, what it's saying, and what it's doing in real time. So some stuff to think about here, for sure. I think it's something that's very, very clear in the 30s because it's such a crux, it's such a turning point as the United States is re-entering World War time. And I kind of look at what happens in the early 1900s with the tobacco cards and the caramel cards going into the 19 teens, and they become very standardized, influenced by tobacco cards, but very standardized advertising or blank back cards like Morehouse, in the later teens, headed into World War I, right? So there's another example of this, and then throughout the 20s, you really just have the strip cards and the cash-in cards, like the cash-in, right? Black and white photographic representations. But again, these are still early formations of the baseball card. There's not yet the fully biographical back, as well as the statistics of the player, the infield, Pittsburgh Pirates. This is a series of 250 pictures. That's taken from the early cards, series of 250 pictures. But it's not fully formed identity-wise yet. And I think that really starts to happen as you hit the 30s with the Goudy cards, right? The Goudy card is really kind of the first modern baseball card in my eyes. Diamond Stars is also a great one, but Goudy's there first in that 33 set. It's just a huge, definitive, declarative statement. The biggest one, I would say, that happens after the T206. And the Cracker Jack, interestingly, is the proto Goudy in terms of how the front and back of the Cracker Jack function. It provides that template, and then Goudy takes it and expands the whole world and universe of it into this multicolored, multi-environmental, very dynamic, sort of almost like jungle of baseball forms. So when you look at the baseball card like that, it's interesting to see these kind of track it side by side with American cultural and historical developments. And you can see that influence in terms of how the baseball card is establishing and conveying itself, and its attempt to either heighten the sensory experience of the icons of baseball, the legends of baseball, or the idea of baseball as a cultural form, or to have it be this very grounded, fundamental, essential, stripped back, minimalist form. As I said, with the Morehouse, as well as the 1939 play ball. These are things that you can track because they're cultural developments that are not separate, right? They're not mutually exclusive. They're part of this larger ecosystem that's breathing, it's contracting and expanding, and creating this whole environment of influence based on the current cultural, social, and political factors of the time. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I will catch you on the next one. See you.